Johnny Carson's blacklist, the guests he secretly despised. For 3 decades, Johnny Carson welcomed America's biggest stars onto The Tonight Show. On screen, he was warm, charming, and endlessly professional. But off-camera, Carson kept a mental list of celebrities he privately considered intolerable. These weren't just difficult personalities. They were people he believed revealed a darker, even cruel side behind the mask of fame. Joan Crawford and Frank Sinatra. The first was Joan Crawford, the legendary actress who symbolized old Hollywood glamour. On television, she appeared elegant and gracious, but according to staff, she was cold and calculating off-camera. Crawford arrived at the studio with pages of demands, specific lighting angles, exact studio temperature, even the height of Carson's desk. She brought her own makeup team despite the show employing award-winning artists. Most troubling was how she treated people she considered beneath her. When a young assistant accidentally entered her dressing room with water, Crawford launched into a verbal attack so vicious that the girl fled in tears. Moments later, Crawford transformed into the perfect Hollywood star as soon as the red light came on. Carson later remarked that interviewing her felt like talking to a statue. When Christina Crawford published Mommy Dearest years later, revealing allegations of abuse, Carson wasn't shocked. He had seen enough in those few hours to believe it. Then came Frank Sinatra, one of Carson's most complicated guests. Stage, their interactions looked friendly, but Carson reportedly loathed Sinatra's bullying behavior. The singer often arrived with an intimidating entourage, creating an atmosphere of tension in the studio. During one taping, when a floor manager gave the standard 3-minute cue, Sinatra grabbed the man by the tie and snarled, "I'll go on when I'm ready." Carson nearly canceled the segment on the spot. He also witnessed Sinatra belittle staff, make crude remarks about women, and cancel appearances at the last minute simply because he wasn't in the mood. After one particularly tense show, Carson told producers to limit Sinatra's visits to once a year at most, a rare restriction for someone of Sinatra's stature. Orson Welles and Bette Davis. Orson Welles was one of the most brilliant minds in cinema, the visionary behind Citizen Kane. But when he appeared on The Tonight Show, Carson quickly discovered why Hollywood called him both a genius and a nightmare. Welles loved the sound of his own voice and would often dominate interviews, speaking in long, theatrical monologues. Carson, who valued sharp timing and balanced conversations, found it unbearable. More troubling was Welles's arrogance off-camera. He barked orders at stagehands, demanded his chair be raised higher than Carson's, and even insisted that his wine glass be filled with imported French Burgundy. No substitutions allowed. During one taping, Welles interrupted Carson mid-question to deliver a 5-minute story about dining with kings and queens, leaving Johnny visibly irritated. When the cameras stopped rolling, Carson muttered to a producer, "That man doesn't want a conversation, he wants a coronation." After that night, Welles was quietly kept off the booking list for several seasons. Bette Davis, one of Hollywood's most iconic actresses, carried her fierce screen persona into real life. By the time she appeared with Carson, she was already known for feuds with directors and co-stars. Carson hoped to celebrate her career, but what he got was something closer to a battlefield. Davis treated the interview as if she were auditioning for dominance. She interrupted Carson repeatedly, dismissed his questions as silly, and even mocked his Midwestern charm. During commercial breaks, she openly scolded staff for not addressing her as Miss Davis. Crew members whispered that she terrified them more than any guest they had ever dealt with. Carson, who prided himself on keeping his cool, later admitted to friends that she was one of the most unpleasant interviews of his career. Though he respected her talent, he considered her impossible to deal with. After her appearance, he reportedly told producers, "That woman didn't come here to talk. She came here to conquer. Bob Hope and Joan Rivers. Bob Hope was one of America's most beloved comedians, but to Johnny Carson, his later appearances on The Tonight Show became increasingly difficult. Early in his career, Carson respected Hope's legacy as a pioneer of comedy. But as the years went on, Carson saw him as a guest who refused to adapt. Hope often relied on a team of writers who fed him pre-scripted jokes through cue cards. Rather than engaging in real conversation, he would recite lines, word for word, ignoring Carson's attempts at spontaneity. Carson once joked privately, "Interviewing Bob is like talking to a vending machine. You push a button, and out pops a gag." What frustrated Carson most wasn't the jokes themselves, but Hope's insistence on total control. He demanded cue, cards be positioned in his direct line of sight, and scolded staff if they weren't perfectly timed. Off camera, he often brushed off younger comedians, showing little interest in anyone who wasn't part of his tightly controlled act. Carson, who valued authenticity above all else, eventually grew weary. Though Hope was welcomed out of tradition and respect, Carson admitted he dreaded his visits in later years. Joan Rivers had once been one of Carson's favorite guests. Quick, sharp, and fearless, she became a regular, even serving as Carson's guest host when he was away. But behind the scenes, tension was brewing. The real break came when Rivers launched her own late-night talk show on the Fox network without telling Carson beforehand. For a man who had mentored her and given her a platform, Carson felt it was an unforgivable betrayal. But even before that, Carson had grown frustrated with Rivers' ambition. She was relentless in pushing herself into the spotlight, often interrupting conversations to deliver punchlines or outshine fellow guests. Crew members recalled how she demanded extra camera time and argued over seating arrangements to ensure she was always center stage. Carson cut off all contact with Rivers after the Fox incident, never speaking to her again. To his staff, he summed it up bluntly. She didn't just burn a bridge, she blew it up. Dean Martin and Shelley Winters. Dean Martin was a superstar, a member of the Rat Pack, a successful singer, and a celebrated comedian. On television, his charm seemed effortless. But Carson saw a different side. Martin often arrived at The Tonight Show visibly intoxicated. While his boozy persona was part of his act behind the scenes, it created problems. Crew members recalled moments when Martin slurred through rehearsals, forgetting his cues or wandering off set. Carson, who relied on sharp timing, was forced to cover for him more than once. Off camera, Martin's indifference frustrated Carson even more. He rarely engaged with staff, brushed off pre-interview discussions, and often acted as though being there was a burden. At one taping, when asked about a question Carson planned to ask, Martin shrugged and said, "I don't care, Johnny. Just get me through it." Though audiences adored him, Carson privately considered Martin unprofessional. Respectful of his fame but tired of the antics, he limited Martin's visits as the years went on. Shelley Winters was a two-time Oscar winner, known for her fiery personality both on and off-screen. When she came on The Tonight Show, she lived up to her reputation, and then some. Winters often drank before appearing, which led to unpredictable behavior. In one infamous episode, she stormed onto the set carrying a bag of ice, which she dumped onto Carson's desk, ranting about her ex-husband. Another time, she interrupted a fellow guest mid-story to launch into a tirade about women being undervalued in Hollywood. Carson admired her talent but loathed her unpredictability. She created chaos on a set that thrived on timing and flow. After one particularly erratic appearance, Carson reportedly told a producer, "She doesn't need a talk show, she needs a referee."